It is windy outside this morning. You may have noticed that if you've already been outdoors. I had to go out a short while ago, and well, we have a gaggle of cats that well, they don't live at the radio station. They live nearby, and so what we do is we put out a little food for them now and then, and they like to come early when the weather's bad because they don't like to be out in the wind and rain. Most people don't either, but the cats are a little bit more finicky about it. So I stepped out to put a little food in the food dishes, and a couple of them greeted me. They finished eating, and then they were gone. This does not normally happen because often they hang around the doors waiting for people to stop, pet them, sit down, and play with them and the like. But not this morning. They are already out of the way because they know something happens to be coming. It was a warm morning to start. I came in yesterday, and I think the temperature was 35 or so when I drove into work. It was 57 this morning. But that's going to be our high for the day. It's going to tumble throughout the morning and then through the afternoon. We'll be down in the mid-40s and expect some rain today. But we do have it on good authority. Temperatures back into the 70s by this weekend, although we could have some wind to deal with again when that does happen. 8 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you this morning. 46 right now. So as I mentioned, from 57 to 46 in a matter of about 3 hours. And that will not get any warmer before the end of today. We have a lot to talk about. Steve Millington is coming by in a short while from the Twin Falls Republican Party. He'll talk a little bit about the close of the legislative session. Speaking of that, I want to get to something on that in just a moment. Also coming up a little later in the program, the Defense Department has authorized a course that says that the Bible, the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution, of which, of course, our troops swear an allegiance to, that these are sexist documents. I kid you not. We are gradually seeing the Alinskyeites whittle away at every last bastion in this country so that they can try, and we say try, and they may well succeed in destroying everything that has gone before so we can all live like the old East Germans did in cinder block high-rises and go down and get our daily allotment of emery cloth to be used as toilet paper, and stand in line for 2 hours in order to do that. Speaking of dealing with people who have a globalist view, there has been a story bubbling in Idaho for the last few days. In fact, right after we did a guest appearance on the show Friday, I got a heads up about a bill that was being debated by state legislators. And it was ostensibly a bill that was going to help people collect child support. Think about this for a moment. In case somebody you know in the family owes child support and then they flee the country, how do you go about collecting money from them? Well, you could you could pass some legislation that would allow a treaty to go in place that would allow that money to be collected if somebody happened to be in Europe or South America or somewhere else. On the other hand, there were concerns that this bill would subject the people who actually agreed to it in this country to international law in order to collect that money. You give up a little bit of sovereignty every time someone passes such a bill in this situation. Here's what the AP has to say about this. Idaho is at risk of losing millions of dollars in federal child support funding after conservatives, oh, those mean old nasty conservatives, in the legislature killed a measure that would have brought the state into compliance with federal rules. Conservative lawmakers were concerned that passing the legislation could have forced the state to enforce child support rulings made in other countries, yes, under Islamic law in some cases, an objection others characterized as meritless. Of course they would. Just the same way they said, no, we only want civil unions. We'll never ask you for same-sex marriage. No, it's only fair to have civil unions so we can get the same benefits you get. Then they got it. Well, no, we'll never force a baker to bake us a cake. No, but it's about marriage equality, and you're just being a bigot and being mean to us because you won't let us get married. But no bakers and photographers will ever be affected. So when you hear liberals talking, it's like Islamic dimitude. They're going to tell you whatever they want to tell you to get what they want. The lie justifies the means for these people. And I think it's good that there are people in Boise who actually take this to heart, and they actually have some concern about this. Now, we'll get to our caller in just a moment. But first of all, I want to finish this. Some House members said last week that they were concerned the bill was tied to international convention regarding cross-border recovery of child support payments. Health officials said Monday that if Idaho is not brought into compliance within about 60 days, they stand to lose access to programs that help locate child support scofflaws, as well as $46 million in federal payouts. In other words, the federal government says you have to take this money. If you don't do what we tell you to do, you can't get it. So, you're dealing with a very nefarious situation here. You got to make a deal with the devil in order to get the money. Well, I am glad that Governor Otter, earlier this year, actually instructed people in state government to start making contingency plans for the day when there is no federal money coming into the state. And as I said yesterday, when that happens, then perhaps people are finally going to realize, hey, we don't need the federal money. And on the other hand, we're going to, in exchange, take back the land the federal government has taken from the state. Take that 2/3 of the land back, turn it into some profitable enterprise, and just tell the federal government, sayonara. It's 8:12. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story 45 at our studios. And you're up next. Thanks for your patience.
Hi, good morning. So I seriously hope you're right about the whole state turning around and kicking the feds out. That would be excellent. I mean, especially seeing how since the Federal Reserve is privately owned, and basically our government can't tell them what to do.
Yeah, it's a handful, maybe a dozen or so banks, and they pretty much have decided that they're going to, calling it the Federal Reserve is a nice way to sell it to the American public.
Yeah, well, and the whole Hillary Clinton campaign stuff, I mean, how can anyone believe that she's for the people when she's funded by the 1% of the 1%?
Well, I don't think we're going to have a lot to worry about with Hillary Clinton. I thank you for the call. Later in the program, I'll share why. I've got a whole series of, I've done a little collecting over the last 24 hours since Mrs. Clinton actually made her announcement. Let me share this with you very quickly. I did enjoy the one, there was a comment made by a columnist at the Wall Street Journal named James Taranto, and he was apparently away last week because he had surgery done for a detached retina. None of that sounds pleasant. None of that sounds pleasant whatsoever. But he came back to work, and he started to work again yesterday after being away for a week, and says it's unfortunate that she made the announcement this past weekend because if she had done it a week ago, he says with the logo that she's using, he could have used that to find his way to the hospital. And I thought about that. You think about that. Barack Obama had that great big stylized O that he used. And whether or not you like the man, it was pretty cool. I mean, it was this O with a road and a highway and a blue sky, and they sold the imagery with all of that. Then you've got Hillary Clinton's. It looks like the old, I hate to say this, even though it's an H, it looks like, for basketball fans out there, you have to really go back. Before they became the Clippers and moved to California, it was known as the Buffalo Braves in the old NBA. And they had one of the most incredibly awful-looking logos in the history of sports. That's what Hillary Clinton's stylized H looks like when you take a look at that. And as he pointed out, somebody else, in fact, was pointing this out, the arrow on it points off to the right and not to the left. And she's trying to win votes mainly on the left, of course. But the arrow points on to the right-hand side. So some heads may roll about that. It's possible. You don't want to cross paths with these Clintons because, well, just think about what happened to Vince Foster. 8:15, Bill Colley with you this morning. This is Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Our telephone number is 736-0300. That is 736-0300. So the legislature has said no. The problem is you are going to be seeing, of course, all of the ninnies at all of the state newspapers screaming and yelling about how awful this is and how bigoted it is because, oh, no, they're using the straw man of Muslims all over again. You know what? There has to be concern about this. When you have Islamic prayer requests in Pocatello, when you have people reciting quotes from Muhammad, supposedly from him, at Twin Falls schools, you have to start to be concerned. Because I'll tell you what, in Europe, it took less than a generation. It was just a trickle at first, a handful of people here and there, and everyone said, oh, but it's the right thing to do, these poor oppressed people. And since Europeans are either aborting their children or not having any in the first place, they need the replacement workers. So they started bringing them in. Then they said, well, tell you what, we'll need more. And then more and more and more. This has all happened. I have a friend who grew up on the East End of London, and I was talking to him last summer about this situation. And within just the last 15 years, which in human history is a really short period of time, that area that he grew up in is now It could as well be anywhere in the Middle East. I mean, that's how dramatically and drastically it has changed. And all of these people who say, "Oh, you folks in talk radio are just whipping up the hate of these people," I don't hate them. I'm just telling you that as they start to grow in numbers, and they will, even in the most unusual places in the United States, there was a time when we said, "Hey, we'll never see MS-13 doing business in the northern states." That's the Latin gang that has caused a great deal of problems throughout South and Central America, and it also has in many parts of the southern United States. MS-13 now operates in Alaska. How much farther north could they get? And if they're in Alaska, they're in Canada as well. They're a worldwide outfit now. All of that happened in a decade, my friends. I am sick to death of Lefty telling us, "Oh, you're just stirring up trouble out there in talk radio, just trying to get people to listen and just pick up ratings. And that's just mean-spirited on your part to do that. Muslim is my friend. He's going to come over and help me celebrate my same-sex wedding." Yes, he certainly is. He'll bring his scimitar along. And then we'll have a conversation about the headless horseman, or whatever you want to call it when it's all done. I am telling you right now, this is a good concern on the part of legislators who went forward with this. Because you do not give up your own personal sovereignty to somebody at The Hague or at the United Nations in Geneva or among the Islamic republics in the Middle East. You just simply do not do that. Lefty seems to feel that the culture that we have is somehow warped, terrible, and cruel, and that therefore we have to get rid of it. And they're saying that we should replace it with the Sharia and the Islamic culture. I don't think so. I think that what are we going to do? Start burning people in cages every time they upset somebody in charge? I don't think we want to go there. And I think that this is a legitimate concern, and we need to applaud the people in Boise, because you know what? Okay, there may not have been an army of Muslims marching down a Broadway on their way over to torch the state capitol. Not yet. But sometimes it's a good idea. You know, when you see disease out there, you know, it doesn't take much. Some of these really nasty diseases around the world are spread by just a little bit of, mist in the air from somebody's sneeze or a cough. And sometimes you have to take precautions in order to stop that so it does not spread and kill the entire host. And this is a case of where we are saying, look, we've got a culture, we're proud of it, we want it to continue, we want it to stay the way it is. We find that there are certainly things in it that may need some work from now and then, but overall we're pretty happy with it. It has been a fairly good culture for us, considering all the luxuries we now have in our modern lives and the empire that it built. And yet you can't get Lefty to buy into that. Lefty wants everyone to be walking around and just at the behest of government or some nefarious worldwide power. Coming up on 20 after 8. Hey, in about 10 minutes, we'll be joined by Steve Millington from the Twin Falls County Republican Party. I hope you can stick around for that. This is Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, 45 at our studios. I have been mentioning for a couple of months now that a lot of really wonderful people make this show possible. And I wanted to mention Western States Bus Services. They've been in the studio with me, in fact, talking about, well, a lot of people out there are looking for that little extra work, especially if, you're semi-retired, but you want to keep busy and you want to work maybe with young people. And I've mentioned it before. One of my bus drivers when I was in school, she was like a second mom to all of us. So, you can have an influence on a child's life even sitting in that driver's seat. Western States Bus Services is hiring part-time bus drivers right now, split shifts, 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. The pay is $10.75 per hour. You could apply today by calling 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. And also coming up on Wednesday, that is tomorrow, Jonathan Tripp, the doctor, will be in studio with us. And here's the question. When was the last time you asked a friend for medical advice? Well, you've got to look at Dr. Tripp in that sense. He's here on the air, friendly guy, and he's willing to take your telephone calls about, health issues that you may have or questions or comments. And he's going to be talking with us about a whole grab bag of issues tomorrow. But I really do think you've got to tune in. And if you have a question and something that's really been gnawing at you for the last week or so, this is your opportunity. And you don't often get, a medical answer for free. So this is, you've got that period tomorrow between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. We do it every Wednesday, Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine. We need to point out that the office is located on Fillmore Street. That's directly across from the main post office here in Twin Falls. Hey, quickly, too, I wanted to pass a couple of things along this morning before we get too deep into the show. There was a writer by the name of Daniel Burnett. I don't know who the guy is. It's the first time I think I've ever seen anything that he's written. He has a piece today at the Washington Times. Director of Communications at the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, a higher education and nonprofit dedicated to academic excellence. And he calls this Fading American History. I'm going to jump down about 5 paragraphs. 1 in 5 Americans failed to identify John Wilkes Booth as Abraham Lincoln's assassin. And 1 in 3 could not identify Mr. Lincoln as a leader of the Union Army. Well, he was commander-in-chief, you may recall. In a multiple-choice survey, just 18% knew the effect of Mr. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. And when asked to identify Mr. Lincoln's words, more respondents chose a passage from the Declaration of Independence than Mr. Lincoln's famous phrase from the Gettysburg Address, quote, "The government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth," unquote. College graduates, too, he writes, struggled with a survey. More than a third of graduates didn't know when the Civil War took place, and only 28% knew the effect of the Emancipation Proclamation. Less than 40% correctly identified the phrase from the Gettysburg Address, one of the most famous lines in American history, as Mr. Lincoln's. Here's one for you. When was the War of 1812? Let's see if any of you public school graduates can get that. Or how about this one? Who's buried in Grant's tomb? I hate to admit it, I taught for a short period of time when I was first out of college, and I would get frustrated some days in class, and I would throw those out, and I'd get blank stares. I kid you not. Now, this was 30 years ago, and it's not gotten any better, and this is why. And then I'm moving over to the Wall Street Journal, a column here by William McGurn. Progressives tried to steal Lincoln, and he's writing, see, if you dumb down the public enough where they don't know when the Civil War was, or who was in charge, or who said what, then you can easily tell them, you can fill their heads with myth instead of fact. He says, watch MSNBC and you will hear Chris Matthews proclaim that today's GOP as a party of Lincoln would not be caught dead in. Or he says, plug the party of Lincoln into Google News and you will be rewarded with article after article on the Republican betrayal of its founding president. Open up the Washington Post and you will find Harold Meyerson, who's a confirmed, I should point out, socialist, taking it all to its logical conclusion in a piece headline, today's GOP is the party of Jefferson Davis, not of Lincoln. Because, of course, they all knew the man, right? No, of course not. Indeed, he writes, these days about the only folks willing to stand up and make the case that the modern Republican Party is very much Lincoln's child are those on the right who regard Lincoln as a warmonger and hold with the left that the great emancipator was the father of big government. What these views have in common, of course, is that each rips Lincoln from his own context. And then McGurn goes on to actually cite some historical comments Lincoln made speaking to troops from various states. And he said that you need an open field and a fair chance for your industry, enterprise, and intelligence. And that was a theme that he repeated many times. In other words, self-reliance. Self-reliance is a means of making America better. And for all of those people out there, and there are some on the far right, some of them are actually friends of mine, and I agree with them on about 99% of what we talk about. But they will say, well, Lincoln suspended habeas corpus, and Lincoln did this, and Lincoln did that. Number one, he was trying to save the country. Was the country better off as one or as two? And secondly, we have a base right now at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. If tomorrow the Cubans started shelling that base, what would we do? We'd go to war. If the Japanese started shelling our base at Okinawa, we'd go to war. You understand what I'm getting at here? Lincoln was trying to figure out a way to save the Union, and he had not called up the troops and sent them off to battle, when suddenly some idiot started shelling one of our bases in South Carolina. Now, if you put that into our modern context, we would respond with, might would be probably an understatement. We would go in there and we'd smoke somebody. So I'm sick to death of hearing all of those critics. But it's no better. You've got Republicans who say that JFK would be a Republican today, and I roll my eyes at that. Most Republicans aren't adulterers and liars, and, well, you know the drill. JFK also was if you don't know the story, he was a rapist as well. It was called statutory, but still the same. So let's not try to make these comparisons for people who are long dead. Steve Millington will join us in just a few minutes. It's 8:30, 44 at our studios. Steve Millington joins us in studio. That means, of course, we're going to be throwing a little kerosene on some fires. Welcome back.
Well, good morning. Here we go.
Got a whole 5-gallon can back here.
We need to light up the world this morning.
44, 8:34 at our studios. And we will see some cooler temperatures today. Temperature has dropped already about 13 degrees since I first rolled into work. I do want to point out you can reach Steve during his time here with us by calling 736-0300. This is Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com with Bill Colley. And, of course, for people who don't know, you are the Twin Falls County Republican Party chairman.
Right.
You've been in that role a long time, too.
About 4.5, 5 years.
That's because a lot of other people just simply don't want it.
Yeah. I missed one of the meetings, and this is the result.
Yeah. You came back and they said, "Oh, you're in charge.
You're the new chairman."
We had been talking during some of the breaks about some actions going on. The supposedly legislative session has concluded, but you were saying there could be a special session called.
Yeah, they have a term up there. It's called sine die, and that means that we're done. And they rang that bell at sometime Saturday morning, like 1:30 o'clock in the morning, and finally closed the doors and everybody went home. But they accomplished a few things that everybody should be comfortable with. Education got a tremendous amount of additional money. They put the career ladder in place. They even that's the key word, even rounded up about $95 million for transportation department. And they did that by virtue of a 7-cent a gallon gas tax increase, and they increased the registration fees on our automobiles by approximately $25 per year. That depends on whether it's a motorcycle or an auto or whether it's a heavy truck. And then there was a few things that they did not get done. And one of them was the one that you referenced earlier about this accepting some international law agreement in order to run down people who have crossed borders and have obligations to pay child support.
Which may be, in Idaho, a real handful of people.
I don't think it's a huge number of people. I really don't. Mm-hmm. There could be a 300 or 400, maybe 1,000. I don't know. The trick is we have to sign on. We have to agree to an international law. And by virtue of this international law, we can then chase these people to wherever they want to go. Maybe they go to Saudi Arabia to work in the oil fields. Maybe they go to who knows where, and they leave behind this obligation, this child support obligation that we can't trace them, we can't find them, can't run them down and get the money. We may be able to find them, but we cannot serve legal notice to reclaim their money and bring it back to Idaho to pay child support. So those people just basically start drawing money from the state coffers. Now, Uncle Sam wants us to sign on to this. And the carrot that he uses to get us to sign on is a funding of about It's $16 million immediately and $30 million a year thereafter. So the first years we're looking at a $46 million payment. And that's a pretty healthy chunk of money.
That'd help pave a lot of roads, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would pave an awful lot of roads. But you see, anytime Uncle Sam wants us to do something, the first thing they do is tie money to it. Now, if you do this and this and this and this, we'll pay you this much money. And if you don't, you won't get any money. And so the word that I think you used this morning was we're selling our sovereignty. And I think that's a real good approach. We are, in fact, selling our sovereignty. Are these laws worthwhile on the surface? They look very innocent. Drill down into them a few pages, or let's go down the road 5 or 6 years or 10 years and see how those international agreements get modified and how we get sucked into a situation where we say, hey, wait a minute, that is not what we agreed to sign on to here. But now we have very limited avenues to escape.
Right. The government would say, well, you've been taking my money. You know, you got to do it.
You're stuck. Now, I could give you another example. I do not have the dollar number for the current year, but 2 years ago, the Department of Education gave back to the state of Idaho about $235 million. Now, that is an awful lot of money when we look at Idaho's education budget, which is going to end up at about $1.45 billion. $235 million is about 1/7, but 15%. Well, if all that money disappeared instantly, where would we go to replace it? And that's the first question people begin to ask, and therefore they say, well, I guess maybe we better accept these federal rules, mandates, and cram downs so that we can continue to get our $230 million. Hence, one of the real difficulties and fights in abandoning the Common Core thing. You give up Common Core, you throw it out the window, and many people say we should. You just gave up $235 million. Now, how are you going to replace it?
Hold on to those thoughts. We've got more with Steve Millington coming up in just a moment. He is the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. It's 8:40, 43 at our studios. We lose a degree every couple of minutes, it seems here. Going to be a nasty day outside, so dress warmly and try to stay out of the rain. And we've got plenty more coming up on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com with Bill Colley. Steve Millington and I were just having a conversation about anything from Common Core to the education our parents got. And I was mentioning my mother spending her first 6 years in a two-room schoolhouse and graduated high school but didn't go beyond that, but could quote Shakespeare and the Bible with ease. And we don't do that anymore. And, of course, now we're talking about having to develop a Common Core education system in many states. And you wonder, what was wrong with some of the old ways? It's 8:44, 44 at our studios. And Bill Colley with you, too, as well, on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And you can reach us this morning if you feel inclined, 736-0300, 736. If you're driving, of course, and you're doing that hands-free thing while you're calling, this morning you may need both hands on the wheel anyway because it's going to be very windy out there. We were having a conversation, of course, just before the break we stopped. You were in the middle of a thought, though.
That was a long time ago. And when you get old, those thoughts disappear in a hurry.
Yes, well, then they come back usually about 2 hours later when you're driving down the road somewhere.
That's what I was going to say. One of the things, a lot of people are bemoaning the fact that the legislature raised the gasoline tax 7 cents a gallon. And that's such an awful thing. And just a quick little math. Let's say that you drive about 12,000 miles a year, and that you average 20 miles to the gallon. You're probably going to buy about 600 gallons of fuel in a year's time. And at 7 cents a gallon, that's $42 a year additional you're going to pay in the additional sales or gasoline taxes. Wrong word there. Now, I know that the basic tax, gas tax in Idaho went from 25 cents a gallon to 32 cents a gallon, but keep in mind that 25 cents a gallon is already baked in there. And so the additional cost that you're going to spend is only about $42 a year. Now, that is going to vary depending upon your gas mileage that you get on your vehicle and how many miles you drive. I'm one of these they consider me a high mileage driver, so I would want to use something closer to the 20,000 miles a year. So my bill would probably be closer to $65 to $70 a year in additional gas taxes. I use the roads that much more as well, you see. So that it's nobody hates taxes like I hate taxes. But I can't figure out how we're going to maintain the roads without money. And when this thing passed, 2 or 3 people, complained about the additional cost, and this is horrible, terrible, and we don't want to spend any money. We really don't. We prefer not to give it to the government because government kind of has a bad taste in it's not something we would drive to the local drive-in and order 2 servings of government for lunch. So I said, what we need in Idaho is for one bridge to collapse, just one bridge. and we want it to happen in a bright sunlit day, not in the middle of the night, and we want no traffic on that bridge. They're stopped over here and they're stopped over there, no traffic, but the bridge collapses. Then we'll see how eager people would be to dig in their pockets and round up a few bucks to fix the close to 700 plus bridges that the Department of Transportation has identified as these bridges need some attention.
We have a caller with us, and want to thank the caller for the patience. You're on the air with Steve Millington and Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Good morning.
Good morning. I think this morning I heard that motorcycle tax went up $10 for the lightest vehicle on the road that does the least amount of road damage. It's just ridiculous. And Steve, we need to pick up on the deal and call it like it is. You know, when the government is passing out $200 million, it's not the government's money. They're passing out $200 million of taxpayer money.
Yeah, that's the key. And
and we need to call it like it is so people understand. I mean, if you want to see what you pay in taxes, don't just cash your check. Look at the stub.
That's
and all the deductions, and you will be shocked.
I had young people thank you for the call, young people I used to work for, and they'd look at their checks, the first check they would get, and one of them, she said to me one day, will they do this in every paycheck?
Yeah.
Yes.
I some may know, some may not. I have a son who's a certified public accountant, has a practice over in Meridian and Caldwell. And for those of you from that area, contact. But anyway, this year, 2015, the average person in the United States will work until April 28th, I think the date is, just to pay your taxes. So, you know, the first 4 full months of the year, January, February, March, and April, you worked for various government agencies. You didn't get one penny of that money. It all went to some government agency of some kind to pay for this great upkeep that they provide for us.
In some of those big eastern states, like New York, you're working until about June 1st.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Oh.
Scary.
We have another caller with us. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. What's on your mind?
Good morning. You know, all state workers, you know, state government, federal government, they all get a increase each year in their pay. But a lot of us out here in the private sector, we don't get raises like that. We maybe get a raise every 3 years if we're lucky. And the cost of everything is going up, so we're going to keep adding. And that's what they just did. They added 2 more things. I can't make it out of the grocery store without paying $250 a time. Now, it's going to start crippling us. We can keep saying how it's going to be a small amount each time that we pay each year, but it keeps adding along with all the school bonds passing every year. It all keeps adding up.
That's a COLA, they call that, right? Cost of living agreement that the state negotiates with workers.
You know, just as an example, he talks about that these costs just increasing. You know, when they built the pyramids in Egypt, they didn't do it in one day. They did it one block at a time. And pretty soon they had this gigantic thing built out there that nobody could figure out what to do with. And that's the way it is with the cost of government. Well, it's only a little bit here and it's only a little bit there. Oh, the trouble is we didn't take away anything from the structure, from the building. We just added more on.
We have another caller with us. You're up next, and you're on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. Steve Millington, our guest, along with Bill Colley. Welcome.
Good morning. So my first question is, because my issue is more on local levels, like city ordinances, do they carry the weight of law in the state of Idaho?
You know, that's a little over my pay grade, but I believe that city ordinances are enforceable at the city level, and in a huge majority of the times, those are affirmed by the courts, and then therefore they become a principle of law.
It really irritates me that our city councilors seem to think that they can have us pay these fees for permits for everything.
Here's a question then. Do you go to the meetings and bring that up?
Oh yeah, but they don't listen to me. If anything, they just roll their eyes at me. I mean, it basically makes me feel like they only see us as a piggy bank.
Well, we'll have a member of the council in house tomorrow between 9 and 9:30. So feel free to give us a shout back. Thank you.
And he's right. Sydney here's an example. I read this in the newspaper this morning. A guy down in Ogden, Utah. He worked at a big box store of some kind, and they had all kinds of huge cardboard boxes. And so he gathered a whole bunch of them up and brought them home and built a cardboard fort for his young children in his backyard. Taped it together with duct tape, and they had this nice cardboard box fort that he built for the kids in the backyard. And it wasn't just his kids. They had huge kids playing in the great cardboard boxes. Somebody turned him in to the city council and says, ordinance number thus and so, and it had it coded in the article. And the city sent him a letter and said, dismantle and remove in 14 days or face a fine of $125 a day.
And again, you've got to have somebody who's got a little bit of ability to be judicious in these situations.
I wish I were his next door neighbor, because I would tell him, bring them all to my yard, because I'm not subject to that restriction. We'll rebuild it at my place, and when they slap me with it, we'll go to the next place and put it up again. But it's ludicrous how they just, I mean, is there no end to this crap? They just seem to become...
Say 54. Now, there's the question of the day. It's 43 at our studios. Steve Millington, our guest in studio on News Radio 1310 KLIX, along with Bill Colley on Top Story. You're up next. All right, well, what we'll do is we'll just move on to our next line. And you're on the air with Steve Millington.
Hey, hi, guys. I was just wondering about the thing that worries me about all this stuff is once this is all said and done and it's all raised and all that stuff, and then 4 years later, 3 years later, nothing's been done. And you know, that's the federal, look at the stimulus that have been, you know, that the federal government has done, and then here we are 6-7 years later, and nothing done.
Yeah, and the interesting point to your question is, and this is on 2 points. Transportation, do I see a significant change or improvement is the word I want. Thank you. Improvement in the roads in the state of Idaho? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, it's time to elect some new people. If the answer is yes, okay, maybe they made the right decision. The other one that really I grapple with an awful lot is the education budget. We added $100 million this year, and I'm sure we're going to add that much more in subsequent years. And the career ladder for teachers is going to get, at the end of 5 years, this is just a question. Are all of our students going to be performing that much better at the end of 5 years?
Well, we'll have to wait and see on that, won't we?
And
then
if
we'll
not,
discover
why
if
not?
it was wasted or not.
That's right. And part of, I talk to people in the education group, and I tell them, you'd better perform at an extraordinary level because you got everything you wanted. You've got all these wonderful promises, and they have now implemented them, and you're getting lots more money. And if we don't see a significant improvement in our public education process, you guys are going to be in hot water.
Again, when was the War of 1812? If you can't answer that question, we've got a problem.
That's exactly right. This morning on the television, they had a young woman who runs a campus concern, or I'm sorry, I didn't remember the name, but she was complaining at Virginia and Maryland, University of Virginia and University of Maryland, if the students there would destroy their evidence of U.S. citizenship, in other words, illegals, if they would tear up their evidence of U.S. citizenship, Social Security card, driver's license, all that kind of crap, they got so much more in additional free stuff, free tuition, free this, that the actual cost of college education, a 4-year college education, decreased by $80,000 over a 4-year period of time. And she said, what are we doing? We're teaching these people that it is to their economic benefit to disavow citizenship in the United States of America. And she said, what in the world are we doing? that we will give those kind of privileges to people who are not citizens of the United States, and the citizens have to pay the additional cost. We are destroying the fabric of citizenship in the United States.
And there is obviously, I think, down the road a reason for all of that.
Well, yeah, we have to be destroyed. They have to destroy our country, and that's what this agreement to this international law, so we can go chase down ne'er-do-wells who don't pay their child support money.
All four of them, yeah.
Yeah.
We've got to wrap up shortly, but sometimes when you're in studio, you have news about a big event coming up or a meeting or the like?
Not that I know of right now. I think we're all kind of taking our deep breath after the legislature's all done. There is one little thing that bothered me: the frustration and the angst about this legislative session really surfaced when we see people who have done an extraordinary service who finally say, I think maybe I've had enough. I can't take this anymore. And that is disturbing to me when we have really good people who just say, I'm going to step down. I've had it. Because, yes, nobody is irreplaceable. But when we see that kind of attitude surface among people who have diligently and carefully performed their services, then I begin to ask myself, have we reached the point where that, for one reason or another, and keep in mind, Rome was not conquered from without. Rome was conquered from within.
Steve Millington, we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
I want to mention coming up, Fox News at 9 o'clock. Also, got a couple of notes about faith. And in North Dakota, legislators have been told if they're Republicans, they can't be served in a local coffee shop. Go figure. Details on the way. There are a number of people who tune in and listen to the program, and I know this because some of them have actually called, and they have taken an oath to the Constitution of the United States. They did that when they were serving in the military or when they were serving in law enforcement, and I got to admit, I even did it myself, albeit I can't make any comparisons to the dangers they faced. I was running a postal sorting machine, and it never once turned on me. A little boring, actually, as far as the work went. But I understand what that oath is about. When you go to work for the government or you end up signing on the dotted line and you end up in the military, you take an oath not to any man. We should probably be politically correct, or any woman. Let's hope not. At least not in the next 8 years, please. It's 42 at our studios. Not that woman. Can we specify that? Not that one particular woman. 42 at our studios. It's coming up on 8 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story, News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. We know over the last few years that we have seen an effort to purge the military of what we might call patriotic Americans. I have a lot of friends who've actually walked away. I have a friend, he could stick around and do 30. He's going to leave. He already said within 2 years when he gets his 20 in. He's already made colonel. He could probably make general. He just said he's done with all the politics. I have other friends who were in the ranks. They frankly got up and left when they had the opportunity because, again, they said it had become so politicized. They no longer wanted to take part in it. They said that it had become the military they knew in the 1990s, which was a lot of decent, hardworking people willing to do the right thing, is now filled with a lot of people who are simply known as gangbangers in some parts of the country. Now, we're not trying to say that's everybody, but you wonder who these people actually, well, when they take the oath, do they understand what they're taking the oath to? And I bring this up because there is a story at the Daily Caller today, and you're going to hear this, and you're going to scratch your head on this one. According to a Defense Department approved sexism course, well, our job is to smash things and kill people, but first we're going to sit here and talk about hurting somebody's feelings, especially if they're a woman. The Bible, the U.S. Constitution, and the Declaration of Independence all contribute to modern sexism, according to this course. Those three cherished texts all count as, quote, historical influences that allow sexism to continue, unquote, according to a presentation prepared by the Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute. What? Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute. Man, is that ever an Orwellian tag? Whose mission is to give a, quote, world-class human relations education, unquote. Again, what's the goal of the military? To smash things. No, wait a minute. First of all, we have to have a world-class sexism education. A Declaration of Independence is also, well, here we go. Let's start a bit more earlier. According to the course, the Bible has quotes which can be interpreted as sexist by readers. They may not be sexist, but if you're a woman in comfortable shoes, you might perceive it that way. The Declaration of Independence is also an historical cause of sexism, as the document refers to only all men, not men and women. Okay. I think they were talking, more in the lines of mankind. All men? Or should they have said all peoples? Quibbling here, aren't we? And the Constitution, the Pentagon argues, is historically a source of sexism because, quote, slaves and women were not included until later in history, unquote. All right. Of course, members, the writer says, of the armed forces take an oath to defend the Constitution, which is, according to the Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute, an historical influence that allows sexism to continue. So are they trying to break down the oath to the Constitution? Well, then who would you be giving your oath to? Well, back in Germany, in about 1933, after Hindenburg died, he was an old general running the country. The troops were told, you're no longer going to take an oath to the German Republic because that's going away. But you will be taking an oath to one man who has appointed himself. He's created a new office on his own called Führer. And what happened, I was watching an old episode. Remember the TV series from the 1970s called The World at War? It was narrated by Laurence Olivier. Yeah, you're sitting there watching this thing and you're hearing that voice in the background, the Atlantic Wall. He had a just beautiful, beautiful voice, the way he would do that. But he was telling the story about how, after that was changed, all over the country, they brought the troops in, and they were all told they had to swear allegiance to Adolf Hitler. And they showed clip after clip after clip of this happening at various bases around the country as people were actually taking that oath. And if you didn't take that oath, you could get in some serious trouble. Have we reached that point in the good old USA? Of course not. No one here is implying that. But if you're downgrading the Constitution, which currently the troops take an oath to, how far before we end up saying, well, we won't have them take an oath to that sexist Constitution because that would be wrong. So we'll have to have a replacement. So who would they take an oath to? And I say who because are they thinking about a person? That's where we start to tread on some dangerous water. The Pentagon, of course, has been chasing away, because the Bible is sexist, the Pentagon has been chasing away chaplains, firing chaplains left and right, because chaplains have been offering opinions from a biblical worldview that hurt the feelings of some troops. Excuse me. When you hired this chaplain and he was a Methodist, what did you think he was? If you don't want them to talk about religious faith, just hire a couple of psychologists and be done with it. 9:13. Bill Colley with you this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You can reach our program today by giving us a shout. 736-0300, 736-0300. My email address is bill.colley. I should probably say Bill period Colley because, not everyone says dot. But Bill, that's a modern, for computers, the literate now that we've had the internet around for 20-some years. Bill.Colley, and that's spelled Colley, Bill.Colley at townsquaremedia.com. And I will sometimes share really good emails on the air. The point there being really good ones. A lot of them are just plain junk. The forwards. I get them even at this account, too, as well. Someone thinks that they should put me on a forward list for all of the latest dirty jokes. And I get more of that in the email than I get of anything else. And I just have to sit here most mornings, delete, before I get through all of it. Some of those are pretty good, though. I get some actually very good ones that I call them deep background. When you read them, they really give you an insight into some topics you're going to be talking about. Speaking of religious faith, the Daily Signal. Big Law thinks that gay marriage opponents are like racist bigots. And the writer says that's a problem. His name is Ryan T. Anderson, and he's going through this, and he's talking a little bit about how the Supreme Court is going to be hearing a case coming up shortly. I think it's late April on same-sex marriage. So there may not even be a decision that's announced until October when the new term starts next year, because it will be late in this term that this takes place. In the court, they take the entire summer off. The rest of you don't, but you're all under 80, right? So the court takes the summer off because they have to go out and be regenerated for a few months, and then they come back in October and they start hearing cases again, or we'll hear very few of them because there's so many court cases that just are bouncing all over the place now. Courts are just overwhelmed. I met a family court judge back in the 1990s who was telling me he was hearing 2,200 cases a year, and I factored in his weekends off and vacations he might take, and realized there was simply no way that he could give everyone a fair hearing, even if he wanted to. I mean, he was that overwhelmed. But anyway, I digress here for a moment. The writer says, throughout the past several years, a constant refrain from the left has been that people who oppose same-sex marriage are just like people who opposed interracial marriage, and that the law should treat them just as the law treats racist bigots. Does the law harm racist bigots? I don't know that it's illegal to be a racist bigot, but he goes on to say no major law firm that filed a brief in support of marriage as an institution did it on the union of a man and a woman. No one among the major law firms, even those who are fighting with some of the religious conservatives on this one, no one filed and said directly in their law brief that marriage was an institution solely between a man and a woman. It's gotten that far. We've moved pushball. I used to go to watch fire department carnivals, and the firefighters would play pushball. There's a ball on a rope that hangs over the road, and one side stands, they try to push that back and forth with a hose. And what they've done is they pushed that ball so far down from the center, and now they're telling us the new spot is the center. 9:16, you're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, and what's on your mind?
Yeah, instead of chaplains, they're going to have political commissars like they had in the communist armies.
Yeah, and if you ever read The Hunt for Red October, you'll see that. There was a fellow, thank you for the call, there was a fellow character in the book, and they later made it into a movie, and that was his job, to be the political officer aboard the ship. And he could even overrule the ship's captain if he so chose to do. 9:17, and you're up next on the air, and good morning to you. You're on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Good morning. I got two things. One, answer to your question is no. The courts do not punish the true bigots. We've seen it over and over where they've actually won money. The other one was I had to laugh when you mentioned how people have to answer about the war. And I've seen case after case on YouTube from white people to all nationalities. Try to answer the question, how many miles will you go traveling 80 miles an hour in 1 hour?
Yes.
It's entertaining. I'm like, you just got the answer and you can't answer it.
I thank you much for the call. My dad used to throw this one at us. What weighs more, a pound of bricks or a pound of feathers? I haven't tried that one on anyone. I did, I think, once with my daughter when she was about 5. She actually got it at the time, which, impressed me. One other quick point. Thank you for the call, by the way. SayAnythingBlog.com. I actually have a link to this posted at our website, News Radio 1310 KLIX. Has a website called newsradio1310.com, just in case you didn't know. And in the commentary section, if you go to On Air, you click on On Air, you'll see my name. You click on my name, and it'll mention Colley's commentary. I have this as the latest commentary today. I link to this. SayAnythingBlog.com has been rated one of the top 100 political blogs in the country. It's out of North Dakota. Amid the fury stemming from the North Dakota House's defeat of an anti-discrimination bill, the Red Raven Espresso Parlor posted a notice that they would be denying service to lawmakers voting no, in other words, Republicans. They have an effort going on, and we call it, add the words in Idaho? It's the same thing in North Dakota. They call it something else. The notice, though, kind of backfired, the writer says, and the only person who seems to have realized it is Representative Josh Boshi, a Fargo Democrat and the first openly gay member of the state legislature. Why would he oppose this? I think he probably, the writer says, understands that a coffee shop banning Republican legislators because of political convictions isn't all that different from Christian business owners refusing service to homosexuals because of their convictions. You think a little light bulb went off at the coffee shop when he explained that to them? Nah. See, it's not about it's about getting us to go along with them. It's not about balancing it and saying, well, if it's right for you, then it's right for me, or if it's wrong for you, it's wrong for me. No, it's about forcing us to participate. There's that old line, that lovely line from A Man for All Seasons, where Thomas More says, and if I go to hell because I go along with this, will you go with me for fellowship? Because he's told he's got to sign for it. Western States Bus Services. I mention them a couple of times every day on the air. And of course, they're looking to hire someone. And a lot of people out there may be looking for a little extra work. Part-time bus drivers are being hired right now, split shifts 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. The pay is $10.75 per hour. Apply today by contacting 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. There is a story that's coming out of the Washington, D.C. area, and you would expect it because everyone there is subject to big government. A friend of mine who's a lawyer, and he was in politics for a long, long time, said to me once, if the central power in the country, the federal power, is located in a spot, the closer you are to it, the more you are going to be subject to it. But he said, as you move physically, he says in real physical proximity, the more distant you are from federal power, he said, the likely more liberty you have. Now, I didn't think much of it at the time, and we've talked already on this program ad nauseum about the volume of land owned by the federal government in the western states. It is just an obscenity. On the other hand, the federal government really, really is starting to learn that people in these states may have more control over things than the federal government would like to admit. But the closer you are to Washington, where you have the seat of federal power, and they have a lot of bases around there, and they have lots of law enforcement around there, and just a lot of overregulated states as well. These big eastern states love regulation. There's a belief that regulating the people is the best thing for them, because obviously people in government are so much smarter than all of us, right? They think so. 41 at our studios, 926. Bill Colley with you this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story. There are a couple of pieces today from a couple of Washington newspapers. We had talked about this on the show in my early days hosting it. There was a young couple. They have two small children. They live in suburban Washington in Montgomery County, Maryland. Very wealthy place, we should point out. They don't believe in what's called helicopter parenting. They let their children walk home from the park. They let their children play in the park on their own. We did it all the time when I was a kid. I mean, Mom, I'm going to the park. All right, be back for lunch. Off you'd go. You might go with your brother or a few friends, and you'd go play, and you'd forget about lunch, and then you'd catch, grief when you got home running a little bit late. But then again, she had only heated up a little tomato soup and a little Spanish rice and maybe a cheese sandwich. So it wasn't like, well, Mom, thank you, but I'm not saying that she was knocking herself out. But we did it all the time, and we would go play. My brother and I would go play in the hayfield behind the house. A doctor in town, he had horses, and there was this huge hayfield, and we lived on this hill, and we would go out, we'd play in that hayfield, and we'd walk all the way down to the very dangerous railroad tracks sometimes. Found an air gun down there once, which I had for many, many years. I discovered I could stick it into the driveway, and that it would, come back up with a clump of dirt in it, and you could pow, and, my brother got a few stings on the backside from that. But, again, we were pretty good kids, mostly. Here you go. For the second time in a handful of months, the same parents are getting raked over the coals by government. Montgomery County, a writer says, at the Washington Examiner, kidnapped 2 children this weekend. Timothy Carney says that's the only way to see this story. Reportedly around 4:55, someone called cops because 2 kids ages 6 and 11 were playing without parents around. The cops forced the kids into a car and then brought them to Child Protective Services. 3 hours later, they informed the panicked parents that they had the kids. So Mom and Dad had expected the kids to come home. They didn't. And then they had no calls. Some people believe this is punishment because earlier the police had picked the kids up, brought them home, and threatened to arrest the parents for letting the kids play alone. The parents fought it. It became a big media story all over the Washington metropolitan area. And that apparently upset the police because they felt their authority was being challenged in this situation. So now the police scooped up the kids and held them quietly for 3 hours at Child Protective to let mom and dad panic a bit. Because you know what? We police know better than mom and dad, so we want to show them what it would be like if their kids were stolen. This is going on in the United States of America. After the parents were finally informed, they had to wait another 3 hours to pick up their children. The children, by the way, and I have been looking through another story on this from the Washington Post, the children even told the police, we know where we're going home. And the police grabbed them and put them into the car and took them away. Now, the children were 10 and 6 when this first happened. They are now, I believe, 11 and 7. But here you go again. Big Daddy government thinks it knows more about raising your kids than you do. Carney writes at the Washington Examiner, the state has become the danger against which it's supposed to guard. If this sounds familiar, it's because it's analogous to stories of police shooting unarmed black men and boys or choking them to death on the sidewalk. So yes, liberals will complain about those stories, but liberals applaud the fact that these kids may be taken away from their parents because the parents allowed them to play alone in a park. Speaking of government trying to take your children, Daily Caller says the president says your children are now his. He didn't quite put it that way, but when it comes to what's called conversion therapy, you've heard of that, right? Michelle Bachmann's husband has a clinic for it. The president says we need to outlaw it. Of course, there are people who've gone through it and claim it actually has changed them from gay to straight, but no one wants to listen to them because that wouldn't be politically correct. So once again, if you choose to send your children, President Obama says you can't. They belong to the state, not you. 40 at our studios, 9:30. More details coming up. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. You know, that instant winner award today is event. Seems appropriate in the middle of this program, along with rant, I guess. 9:33. 40 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You can reach our show today by giving me a shout. 736-0300. Well, if you want to, you can just go out back, open up the back door, step outside, bell! But in the wind today, your voice may not carry very far. So I would recommend the telephone, 736-0300. You can also email me, bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. We were talking about these slippery slope arguments in the middle of this program earlier at one point, and then we were also talking about some of the decisions being made within the U.S. military, which will only hurt military readiness. There's a story that I think is part of both of those, slippery slope and military readiness. I'm old enough to remember the 1970s. Not that there's much I'd want to remember about that, especially the Jimmy Carter era, but I'm old enough to remember the 1970s, and there was a lot of talk about giving women greater roles in the armed forces. Some of you are also old enough and remember the same debate, and we were told at the time, yes, but women will never be in combat roles, so you don't have to worry about, no, they'll be like the Women's Army Corps, yeah, they'll be way in the background, right, yeah. And so what has happened over the course of the last 15 years, 2 wars this country has fought, we've had a lot of women come back who've lost limbs or they've come back in body bags simply because, well, slippery slope. No, this is not a slippery slope. These women won't be exposed to combat. Well, they have been, okay? So whether or not you agree with it, it was sold as a lie, wasn't it? 9:35. Should point out we've got a short piece here from Wesley Pruden, who is now called editor emeritus at the Washington Times. In other words, he retired, but he still likes to write, so they give him a column. And he's very good. Women at War and the Enemy is Us, he titles it. About 4 paragraphs down, he's talking about the Marine Corps. You know, the Marine Corps had decided under pressure from Democrats, and who else? From Democrats, that they were going to allow women to go into some certain obstacle courses. And the women in comfortable shoes were demanding that this happen so they could have equal opportunity. The Marine Corps is a particular target of these advocates who accuse the Marines, he writes, of focusing on tests for strength and endurance on the battlefield, which any radical feminist would tell you are rarely necessary on a battlefield. Yeah, this is true. And you think he's being a little smarmy when he says that? Well, listen to this. Such tests are questionable. Greg Jacob, policy director for the Service Women's Action Network, tells the newspaper. The Marines want to see whether women can deadlift 135 pounds, bench press 115 pounds, carry 95 pounds for 150 feet in full combat gear, load a 120 millimeter artillery shell, and scale a 7-foot wall, which might be burning while they're scaling it. These are skills that might not be needed, Mr. Jacobs says. Yes, this is what this liberal says. He says it may not be necessary for a woman serving in the Marine Corps in combat to have to lift something heavy and carry it for a couple of 100 yards or to climb a flaming wall. What do they plan? I mean, they think the Marine Corps is going to go into just building hospitals all over the world for good? Is that it? And the women will just stand back and supervise if anyone has to carry a load of bricks. Yeah, that'll be the ticket. The debate, he writes, over women in combat does not go away and probably never will until a combat regiment with a lot of women in it gets badly chewed up, leaving a lot of female body parts lying about. That's when Congress will step in with speeches and hearings and much posing and posturing as if actually puzzling over how such a disgrace could have happened. Yeah, you know how that goes. Somebody will get up on the floor of the Senate and say, "Where's the TV camera? Oh, okay, let me face that way. Let me tell you, I was always opposed to the notion of women serving in combat, despite what the record might say." So that'll be the way that works. He goes on to write, most men would stipulate that in many ways, perhaps most women are superior to men. In my family, that's always been the way it has been. But just not at lifting weights, running a 5-minute mile, scaling a burning 7-foot wall, or surviving the squalid and violent misery of killing other men. If they were, he writes, we might already see lady linebackers and female free safeties roaming the Redskins' backfield. So, yeah, political correctness is going to destroy the finest fighting outfit in the history of mankind. And yet we can't stop these people. They are relentless in their attacks on this. Why is it that they would go ahead with this when all the evidence suggests that it is dangerous? 2 reasons. You might hurt the women's feelings, and in lefty land, hurting somebody's feelings is a crime. Number 2, they actually intend in the long run to destroy the U.S. military, starting with the Marine Corps. And by so doing, then they get one last obstacle out of the way that might block their efforts to turn this into the United Socialist Republic of North America. Ultimately, you know and I know, even Lefty out there listening knows that we're aware of what he's up to, and that is exactly the case. That's why they get so upset with conservative talk radio, because they know we are pulling the curtain back and we are showing the public what is exactly going on here. And it galls them, because if people have an education about what's going on, people will oppose it. And Lefty can't have that. He needs you at home, on welfare, guzzling a 6-pack, eating a bag of Doritos, and watching cable TV on my dime, and thinking that you're living like a king. That's how Lefty succeeds. I've got plenty more coming up. About 20 minutes left in the program. Bill Colley with you. Oh, got to talk, too, about Rubio and Clinton if we get a chance before we're done. I have a couple of thoughts about that, and I think Marco Rubio is being sold, a little oversold by some of the conservatives in the country. 40 at our studios. You're listening to Top Story. Got an email I need to share with you quickly, and this is rather tongue-in-cheek. The writer is picking on Steve Millington. Bill, as Steve Millington has decided that all Lincoln events are over, I wanted you to know that the Jerome Central Committee has a Lincoln Day breakfast with legislators planned for Saturday, April 25th, starting at 10 o'clock in the morning at the Jerome Senior Center. That'll last a couple of hours. That's at 520 or 520 North Lincoln in Jerome. That comes from the Magic Valley Republican Women's Club. The luncheon will be a legislative report at the Clear Lakes Country Club. That's also coming up on the 15th, 11:30 a.m. Was that on May or April, though? I'm not quite so sure. But it says on the 15th, which would be tomorrow, 11:30 a.m. social and 12 o'clock meeting. So Jerome and Buell are part of the listening area, as the writer says. So we would love to get to know you. You know, if there's a meal involved, I may actually be there. I've never missed many. I'll point that out. And when you see me, you'll understand what I'm talking about. 40 at our studios. It's coming up on 9:45. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We have a caller with us. You're up next. You're on the air.
Yes, Bill, I just recently started to reread the book by Dinesh D'Souza, America, A World Without Her, Imagine a World Without Her. And then the other day I got on Netflix and seen the movie. I never went and saw the movie.
That's the follow-up movie to 2016, right?
Yeah, yeah. And Dinesh he is, if not a genius, he is sharp as a tack. There's no question about it. But it talks about Hillary Clinton and how heavily influenced and involved she was literally with Saul Alinsky, and same way with Obama. And these two are locked at the hip. But when it comes to selfish narcissism, they tend to separate, I guess, a little bit. If you do, it would do people well to go there and rent the movie or go get the book or whatever, because it's such a comprehensive book about the history and really what is actually truthful about America and her place in the history and currently.
And if we really need to know what's going on in Washington and how nefarious this White House is, D'Souza has experienced what Robert Menendez is experiencing right now, or at least to a degree, where they tried to send him off to prison in spite.
Yes. It's truly a revealing, and like I say, if we truly we want to fight back and win this battle, and we've got to inform ourselves with the truth.
And the truth is there. And thank you very much for the call. It's sometimes just difficult to actually find buried within what I called the other day the establishment or mainstream media. Remember our drive-by caller called in, well, you're the media too. So I said, well, am I like your local newspaper? No. Am I like your local TV station? No. Well, then I'm not quite what you'd call media in the traditional sense. So we'll look at it that way. Hey, I got a story very quickly. I got to mention this too. We have all these arguments going on. It does look as if the president is finally going to yield because there are people in his own party saying enough is enough, and to allow Congress to look over this so-called agreement. I won't call it a treaty, an agreement with Iran, which will allow Iran to build nuclear bombs so they can, smoke Israel. We now have a late-breaking story this morning that it does look as if the White House is going to work with members of Congress and let them know actually about what's going on, as we are supposed to do constitutionally, which, by the way, the president also took an oath to uphold. Oh, well, that was a long time ago. Michelle and I were busy that day, and I really don't remember much more about it. Fill me in on this Constitution. I know I was a professor of constitutional law, but that was also a long time ago, and I was smoking a lot of ganja that day, too. The Washington Post today, which has been cheerleading for the Iranian agreement and cheerleading for a nuclear Iran, is apoplectic this morning in an editorial signed by the entire editorial board because a Washington Post reporter has been held for nearly a year as a spy by the Iranian government. His last name is Rezian, and the writer says he looks like a pawn in Iran's domestic power struggle over the nuclear deal. It says his family and experts on Iran have been saying for some time that the delay and lack of transparency in the legal process will likely reflect the fact that the prosecutors have no plausible case against him and have been stalling while attempting to concoct one. And they go into some rich detail here about how it looks as if there are a lot of different groups in Iran who don't always all agree on the best way to approach a particular topic. So you have constant power struggles that are going on. So here you have Mr. Obama concluding an agreement with an unstable government, which for fun likes to pluck eyes out of people, or hang them from cranes, or send them out in human wave attacks and get 100,000 of them killed at once, as they did 30 years ago in a war with Iraq. So you've got this unstable government. The Washington Post is cheerleading for Mr. Obama's efforts. And yet, the Washington Post is venting today, vent is our word of the day, venting today, because the reporter is being locked up and he may end up dead. He could be hanging from one of those cranes. You never know. And yet, why then would they support an effort to make some sort of agreement with this country, with this criminal outlaw regime? Because why? Because Mr. Obama's behind it. Yes, give him a big wet one right on the bottom every day at the Washington Post. We have a couple of moments away with Mike Huckabee. The Huckabee Report is brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls, 736-6563. Speaking of Hillary Clinton, Has anyone seen the story out of Ohio? Now, Hillary Clinton is driving west to Iowa. The media is all a glitter about this because, oh, golly gee, this is the way to campaign. She's got a driver, and Anthony Weiner's wife, Huma Abedin, I believe is her name, is also going along, and it's just the three of them doing their Thelma and Louise bit going across the country. They stopped in Ohio at a Chipotle to grab a bite to eat. Nobody recognized Hillary. Well, it happens, I mean, a lot of 68-year-old women, with the hair dyed, sunglasses on, all look alike, don't they? 9:54, 40 at our studios. That's been her problem all her life. She can't get a second look, not even from her husband. Boom, boom. So speaking of politics, the other big story on the presidential level was Marco Rubio made an announcement that he is running this week. He is a U.S. Senator from Florida. You've got a lot of these first-term senators. They all figure, well, hey, somebody else did it. And nobody in media complained about him, so why can't we? Marco Rubio announced, but here's the thing. I see all of these conservatives fawning all over the guy. They're either upset with Rand Paul because they call him a flip-flopper. Well, Marco Rubio once supported amnesty. Now he doesn't. He was for it before he was against it. And you've got people saying, well, he's a little bit more moderate than Ted Cruz or Rand Paul, and that'll be better because Americans want moderation. Yeah, country swirling the drain, and we want moderation, absolutely. So Rubio gets up and he makes a nice speech, and he has a nice-looking family, and he's a nice-looking guy, and people say, oh, well, this is going to be a wonderful president. Won't this just... Even some of the conservatives who have been hammering away at Cruz and at Rand Paul as well, when you take a guy, I'll be watching television. There will be George Will, and there will be, what's his name, Krauthammer from Fox. It seems to me that their expertise is basically that they talk in a monotone and really slow. And somehow that makes them experts. And big words. But beyond that, they're never very excitable. They just sit there and talk in that sort of monotone voice. But Krauthammer went so far as to say the other day that he thinks that we've got a really good shot at beating Hillary Clinton if we negate her being a woman versus the potential first Latino president in Marco Rubio. And I watched that for a moment and I thought, what are we talking about? Well, how about Ted Cruz? C-R-U-Z, not C-R-U-I-S-E. Ted Cruz, C-R-U-Z. His father is also from Cuba. And somehow Krauthammer didn't mention that. And they don't mention that Marco Rubio has flip-flopped on one of the major issues of the day. Why? Because he realized he couldn't get elected if he stuck with it. It's not like he suddenly said, you know what? You've been right on the conservative side all along. This is really a bad idea. No, he didn't do that. He just said he'd learned his lesson. In other words, he won't cross up the electorate in his party. Wow, another portrait in courage. Planning on going to Washington and serving in the White House. We've been dealing with that already for the last 6 years. Do we really want more of it? Coming up on 9:58, Bill Colley with you this morning. This is Top Story. Rush Limbaugh will be along in just a few minutes following 10 o'clock news from Fox. Sean Hannity following the 1 o'clock news. Glenn Beck following 4 o'clock news. Dave Ramsey telling you how to save some money later tonight. And God willing, and the creek don't rise, I get to do this all over again tomorrow morning between 8 and 10 o'clock. Remember, we're going to be joined by Dr. Tripp in studio. Better Health. If you have some health questions, get those ready for tomorrow morning between 8:30 and 9 o'clock.